Chinese Art and Archaeology and as former warden of Merton College. This is the only in-person Eurasian seminar of the term that we're having, and in many ways, Jessica is our unofficial keynote speaker for this seminar series. We'd very much like to welcome our international guests who are joining us over Teams and to you here who've been able to make it today. And I will now hand over to Professor Rawson for her talk, The Horse, the Bridle That Tied China to the Steppe.
Thank you very much. This is the first time in 2 years in which I've seen so many people all at once, and it's just wonderful. It's a great pleasure, and I'm very grateful to Anka and Michael for arranging this. And the thing that everybody loves about the horse when they first met it was its speed. And so this horse, which comes from Wuwei in Gansu province in the Eastern Han Dynasty, has its hoof on a swallow. Here's the swallow, indicating that it's flying through the air. But that is, of course, the slightly mystical and poetic way Chinese educated elites viewed horses. They didn't really view them in the stable. The people who really knew about horses are the Mongolians. And I think we need to think about why are they successful? And I'm going to say there are two important forces throughout this talk. The first is a gradient. There's a landfall and a temperature gradient and a moisture gradient. I'm going to show you that in more detail. And then the horse is powerful. It's the only engine people managed to have for military and hunting before the invention of the petrol engine or the steam engine. So it's a key energy source. And we in the West are much more familiar with the horse because all our rulers used to ride. But the rulers in China do not normally ride. So President Xi Jinping has not been seen on a horse, whereas the Queen, age 95, is quite routinely seen on a horse. And I take that not as a comment on their health or prowess, but simply custom. So the key factor, which I'm going to spend the first small bit of the talk on, is actually the geographic and climate situation. And here is China facing what is in fact the Pacific monsoon. The Pacific monsoon rules China. It brings all the rain that makes it prosperous. But you can see it's running out just here. So there is a line beyond which the rain doesn't really go. And even in this broader bit, the sort of slightly brownish region, it's not very strong. And here, the rain is very minimal. There is snow and runoff from these high mountains, but rain is low. So we're faced by, and I shall talk about it all the time, three enormously different ecologies. There's the steppe, there's the area here along the boundary of the Pacific monsoon that I will call the Arc, and then we'll look mainly at the Yellow River Basin. So the rulers, such as they were, and I'm talking about the Zhou, the Shang, the Zhou, and the Qin, the rulers are operating more or less here, and they're extending down into central China. Nobody is operating in here. So this is what it looks like in a map. The previous one was simply a Google image. This is the map, and here the most important thing about this part of the steppe is it's very, very high. So a book I recently read about how dreadfully burdensome Siberia is shows that the temperature from west to east declines over winter. So this is a very bad area for winter, but partly because it's high. Ulaanbaatar is at 1,300 meters high, and that is the height of Ben Nevis. So even if we were sitting on Ben Nevis in winter, we might think it cool. And in Ulaanbaatar, it's cold, very cold. So this is what the steppe looks like. This is Mongolian steppe. These are monuments from the 1400s to 800. These are what is called deer scones. Now, horses are domesticated in the western steppe. So they're out here, way beyond here. So all horses that appear here have come from the Western steppe. There are no horses in China. Such horses as there had been in Paleolithic periods have been eaten. And that's true in many parts of the world, many parts of Eurasia. Horses get eaten, and what we rely on in the period we're talking about, from 1400, say, is the movement of horses from the Western steppe. This is the steppe, and this is a monument. This is another deer stone, and these are indicative of the importance ritually and economically of horses in Mongolia. And they are important from 1400 to now, probably. But this is a deer stone, and what you should look for is the belt, because it's an image, a monument for a man or a person. Normally there is no face, but here he's also got temple ear decoration. Here are the deer, the stags running up, and most important is this belt, which shows you he has weapons and he has a rein holder. This is for managing the horses. At the same time is the era of the Kirusur, and this is a plan where there's a monument surrounded by a fence, and outside the fence are all these dots are burials of horses' heads that take place over a longish period. They're ceremonially buried with horses' hooves and sometimes small bones. So this is a culture of immense importance in central and northern Mongolia, particularly into the west of Mongolia, and even into the borders of the Altai region of China. But I'm just going to leave it with you for a minute. To cross into China is not a walk in the park. You have to go through this large area I call the Arc. And it's immensely wide. It goes from Lanzhou to beyond Shenyang, and that's 2,000 kilometers. And a lot of it is much more than 500 kilometers. The key factor is that Peking is only about 200 kilometers from the steppe. That's the only place in what I would call central China. I'm going to use the word central China, but of course it isn't China. There's the Central Plains, I'm also talk a lot about the agricultural basin. It matters that this is an area of high agriculture. So this is the lowest plateau, where huge quantities of sand from the Gobi have been deposited. This is a glimpse of a river in the Taihan Mountains, and neither of them are particularly easy to cross, and it could only have been done by people who mark out routes, who have people who come and go, because people are coming and going a lot, but it's quite a challenge, and it hasn't been well excavated. We're going to look at excavations along the southern part of the Arc, but there's not much done on the north. And that's what the agricultural basin looks like. Flat, flat, and flat. Of course, it isn't all like this. This is the grain, which today is wheat, but would have been millet, and here are the paddy fields of rice. And an important feature is that they've been planting grains on large scale for, say, more than 2,000 years before any horses reach Mongolia, let alone China. So that the peasant social system of ownership of land, of planting, of paying tax in grain, whoever to, is already so well established, it's one of the barriers to having pastoralism. And China, when I first encountered it, surprised me. You do not see in these fields sheep, goats, cattle, and horses. Now, this is the context. The context is amazingly important because I think it explains and is essential to understanding why there are any horses that come south and why that causes trouble. First, I want to mention that a very important Nature paper has come out recently. Librado and Orlando are both in Toulouse, and they have published in 2 papers this last few months, and they show that the horses are a particular genetic strain, and they are unusually beneficial for use by humans. And all the horses that are currently used by humans are of this group. And this is entirely hot news, it's completely new, and they show that the domestication took place between the Don and the Volga. So that's in the western steppe by a long way. However, they certainly moved the most important thing is there's a gradient. Ulaanbaatar is at 1,300 meters above sea level. What's happening is there's a very high point in Mongolia, which is higher than the Western Steppe, which is the place where the horses are. And horses have evolved to prefer dry, cold weather to hot and humid weather. And this is a key factor that makes moving south a bit difficult. But what makes moving north impossible is that you've got to climb 1,000 meters, and then you'll be faced by winters at, you'll be faced when you reach there, of winters at minus 20 to 30 degrees centigrade, and summers around 22, that is 70. Now, if you go a little south into Inner Mongolia, Huihot is the provincial capital, we're still at minus 20, and we're still above 1,000 meters. So this area is pretty much united, if you like. But if you cross the Yellow River into the lowest plateau, you're now still around 1,000 meters, but the temperature for the winter is rising. And what is more important is that the rain or the moisture is also rising. So in Yulin, which is in the lowest plateau, you could grow millet easily. You can grow millet in Ulaanbaatar too, because it matures very fast. But the most desirable destination for people in the agricultural plain is Xi'an, and here we have a lot of moisture, we have much higher temperatures in winter, higher temperatures in summer, and we're only at 400 meters. So this is a very steep gradient. And when people ask me, why don't the Chinese move into Ulaanbaatar? Well, I've once asked a Chinese what it was like to go to live in just north of the river, and he said, well, winter's not a good idea. So I think that the Chinese lifestyle does not transfer well to the north, but if you want to bring your horses south, it's open. Now, there are very strong limitations to breeding in the Yellow River Basin, and impossible, really, to do so in the Yangtze River. The temperature and the humidity are too high, and horses need to sweat to move at the tremendous speeds they're capable of. So summer temperatures are not good. There's a very distinct lack of the relevant nutrients, and in a paper I've done with Li Min and William Taylor, we're publishing a map showing the nutrient problem. It's very, very significant. And the lowland, as I said, was given over to cropping. So that makes breeding strong horses in the Yellow River Basin not ideal, and that is the thing that Chinese dynasties of all periods suffer from. And I'm going to show that during this period, that is from the Shang dynasty to the Qin, actually relations were well managed. We're not seeing major invasions and major wars. We're seeing the rulers of the Yellow River attempting to develop relations with their neighbors and so obtain horses. Now, this is where I leave the background, and before we get into a foreground, the main item I'm going to talk about are these cheek pieces. I've said that horses are an engine. They're an engine that human beings have to manage. And managing it is not easy. My mother, brought up on a farm, was convinced if she put her darling daughters on horses, that would be fine. The horses had another opinion, and I discovered they were quite as strong-minded as I was, and indeed, they pushed me off. So horses are not easy to manage. They have to be broken in youth. They have to be this kind of horse that is reasonably willing to adapt to human beings. That's quite a sign. And then you have to manage them. Your body is very, very important. You manage them by how you sit on the horse, but also through the bridle. And that's why bridles are tying us down. And we are going to see that there are 5 changes in these items. These are what are called cheek pieces. So you have to think they're either side of the mouth of the horse, like this, and they're not vertical. They're always illustrated vertical, but they're actually semi-horizontal. And the first one is solid, rather solid. It has 2 attachments for parts of the bridle. What this is for is debated. Is it for the bit? Is it for the rein? and it certainly has a slit for a noseband, and only in this period do you have the noseband incorporated in the cheek piece. There are only 3 changes illustrated on this slide. These are in the British Museum. The photographs were taken by Konstantin Chuganov with me and the curator of the time, and the 3 most important ones are this one, and this, and these are noise, just extras. So the second one is this rod-shaped job, and it has 3 holes, one here, and another one. This is for the bit, and it matters that they're in 2 different planes. So 2 of the holes are for the horse harness, 1 for the bit in the center, and in this case probably a loop for the reins. In the 8th century, they give up the bit hole because they push it through the bit, and we're going to look at those 3. These are just embellishments of the same job. You get a central hole and 2 side holes, possibly a useful extra loop at the bottom for the reins, because that's an interesting question. And this is a more simplified form with its fitting. I'm showing you the backs because the reverse is always very important. So we're not looking at a decorative item, we're looking at part of a quite complicated technology, and the people who manage the horses mind a lot about this. Now, the first stage, as I said, is the Shang dynasty. I'm not going to dwell on it because we published a paper with Konstantin Chuganov about this, showing that the people who brought these horses and managed them were probably outsiders, possibly from Inner Mongolia, and here's the charioteer buried prone. And you're not buried prone if you're from the Shang elite. This is a leader buried in his own tomb near the great Queen Fu Hao, and he too is buried prone. And he has this set of chariot tools. This is the rein holder, these are knives like those on the deer stone, and these are for repairing the chariot. And here you see the cheek piece, and the giveaway as to where it comes from is both that it has the single hole and these 2 strap positions, but it also has an insert with spikes. And the spiked insert for the cheek piece comes from the Urals, from Sintashta, from very early use of horses, and the Chinese really give up the spikes in the main after the Shang. Now, I'm not going to dwell on the Shang, but I want to show it to you to say that the next thing is a big change. And in order to look at the change, we're going to have a different kind of context now, which is a social context. There are unusual tombs. They have very fine ritual vessels. They have northern style weapons, and they have new types of material and artifacts. And all of these show that the occupants of the tomb are either local regional groups from the Ark, or even more outsiders from the nearby steppe. So these are what I call unusual tomb burials. This is a Shang one, perfectly reasonable, north-south burial, supine. But these 2 are east-west, semi, and they're prone. So those are clearly not related to the central plains. Here's one with a secondary burial included, a female with a man, and here's a tomb with niches. These are all relatively early tombs before the Zhou period. And there's a lot more work to be done on where these specific tomb types have come from, but they all definitely show different social groups. So the 3 areas that I'm going to look at for the 10th century, this is stage 2, are the Baoji area, and here the area on the Fen River, north of Xi'an, if you like. I'm going to leave this out. It's in our paper, but it's too much for today. So the earliest sign of the Zhou are in the Baoji area, that is to the west of Xi'an, and here we can see at once this is an outsider, a regional group tomb with an additional female, and he has northern style weapons, and he has bronzes that look as if they have been looted or given as gifts from the Zhou. They've got somebody else's name inscribed on them. They're not made for this guy. So this is a new phenomenon, not so common in the Shang, and a very important sign. Now, I don't want to claim that any of the people in the 10th century are coming from the steppe. They're simply coming from the lowest plateau, and they bring a different kind of cheek piece. So this is the old kind, the Shang kind, and here we have the new kind. These are bronze, and what are they imitating? They're imitating the steppe. These are steppe cheek pieces from Russia, Iran, and Siberia, and these are made of an organic material, normally antler cheek piece, antler, sometimes bone, and occasionally, in desperation, wood. The Chinese have tons of bronze. They make them in bronze. And so in this Baoji area, the first appearance, we get 8 of these, which is the set for a 4-horse chariot. And the Zhou bring in the 4-horse chariot, and this man is buried with a set of cheek pieces for his 4-horse chariot. And this is another copy. And then the Chinese do the usual elaboration. The agricultural people have masses of bronze, and they make more beautiful forms like this. So there are a huge variety of forms, but it doesn't tell you anything more than this is the source of a completely new type of cheek piece. But you wouldn't get a new type of cheek piece if you weren't in contact with the steppe. So it implies that these people in Baoji have communication with people in the lowest plateau who are in communication with the people in the north. So this is the pattern that goes on again and again and again. And it doesn't matter that we're talking about 800 kilometers. It doesn't seem to matter. The horse is so important that every effort is made to get them. And in order to look at what they look like, I'm showing you an Assyrian relief. And here you see this kind of cheek piece in the harness. So it has 2 holes which for attaching the cheek part of the harness. It has a hole probably for the bit, but it may not have needed it. And then actually at the end, it has a hole for the rein. And this is true of this horse. This is an Assyrian system of riding. This is the king riding, attacking the lion, and he's got his second horse with him. Now, we'll look at this again much, much later. He's got soft shoes. You can't be a rider if you don't have soft shoes. And here are the kinds of cheek piece that came into China. This is a Kazakhstan one. And I had this nagging question, which way up should they be? They're always published this way up, but actually this is the right way up. So the point of this cheek piece goes forward with the horse, and the heavier end is going to be attached to the rein. So this is an important feature of these, if you like, this is called a rod-shaped cheek piece. And this is an important piece of riding. The solid ones, which we saw in the Shang, like this, only press against the mouth. If you have a rod-shaped one, and this is a scene from Persepolis, like this, you actually have a lever. And that's a much more subtle piece of riding needed. If you can lever and move your different, you can also move the left and the right hand differently. And nowadays, lots of cheek pieces, bits of the bit, are in fact levers. And this is a key discovery of the steppe people around the 11th, 10th century. It's not a discovery of the agricultural plains. So if we now go to the Fen River, here is another of these tombs that shows we have a regional group. It's not a local Zhou person, but he's very, very well off. He has 71 ritual vessels in the days when you only need 20. So they're clearly gifts, booty, bribes, who knows. And here we find what I would call a northern weapon again. So that these people who are working for the Zhou, they're getting gifts of bronze or they're being accommodated, have a large supply of metal, and they turn them into their own types of weapon. So people have talked about northern zone weapons for decades. They are a sign of a regional group living quite near the Zhou, but not actually Zhou people. And here are their cheek pieces. That man's tomb had 18 of antler. These are the antler examples. They're 10 to 15 centimeters long, and they are this type. This is the type I showed in bronze in the British Museum, is a copy of these. And this is a second tomb in the same area. The Chinese of the day recognized them as outside and called them Ba. And they made bronze versions too, and this complicates the typology for everybody working on this. But if you accept that we've only had 2 types, and this type has 3 holes, you're quite clear where you are. This is the 10th century. And here is a Zhou person, and he too has the antler cheek pieces, and he has bronze ones. So if you look at proper Zhou tombs, they have joined in. But if you look at a cemetery, and not just one tomb, you will find that the bulk of the cheek pieces, especially the antler ones, are in tombs of people who are not standard Zhou. They have funny burials. So I would claim that we should give the Zhou a large amount of appreciation. They have managed, as the Shang, to work a heterogeneous society with different groups accommodated within their society, both for if you like, riding and fighting, but also for managing the horses. If you are not, in fact, a rider yourself, and there's no reason to think that the elite were, then you need riders and drivers, and that's what I think these outsiders supply. Now, this is the first phase, and in some ways the most optimistic phase. This is a phase when the Zhou really managed their relations with the north very, very well. However, in the 9th to 8th century, there's a huge upheaval, and they lose control of what I call the Baoji region, which is here, and they're gradually pushed east to dominate because they must control this. This is the proper agricultural land. So they are moving east, and the reason they're moving east is a completely new kind of problem. And they name it and describe it in their texts, including contemporary oracle, bronze vessel inscriptions, and they call these people the Rung. And the Rung is simply an umbrella term. It's not specific to being anything. It's also got sort of barbarian warlike character. So it's a name for barbarian warlike people, and they are definitely causing trouble. And so there are descriptions of war. Li Feng has written good books about this. There's definitely warfare, but it's not big-scale warfare. This is not the Xiongnu. This is not the Khitan. This is local warfare just here. So to symbolize this, I've shown you this, partly because Chris and others saw this excavation at the very beginning, where the chariot, for some reason, has bronze tires, which makes one think of Turkmenistan, but a much earlier period in Turkmenistan, where there are bronze tires. So it's about 800, and it's from the 9th into the 8th century that this upheaval is taking place. People who study texts see it as a sort of political upheaval. I would say it's an upheaval caused by destabilization because there are new people coming on board. But they're not, these people do not become named state rulers. The people I've shown you before acquired Chinese names, acquired a status among the Zhou. These lot don't. So if we go back to the map, the first group we find, the relatively early one, is here, and it's not impossible or difficult to think of moving here. And these never become associated with a particular state or name. They don't have proper ritual sets. They have some Chinese bronzes, but I'm sure they melt them down to make their own. And here is a guy buried in a stone-surrounded tomb. Now, stone of all types is a steppe taste. I showed you a few stone monuments, and wherever you find stone in China in this period, it's a sign that the person involved may have northern connections, or maybe a northerner. And so you can, this bronze could be from Kazakhstan, and we see new bits. So this is a new type of bit with what I would call, everybody calls a stirrup-shaped end. And this is being used on the steppe. And at the same time, in the 8th century, the remaining Zhou elite, if you like, are still doing their bit, and here they have their full set of ritual vessels. I think what I called the ritual form is precipitated by this upheaval, but this man has taken a foreign wife, and these are the little bronzes in her tomb. This is a steppe type of cauldron, and clearly she's at least, if not further north, she's certainly from the Ark. And these are the bits and cheek pieces. So this is Siberia. Here you get the steppe-shaped bits from the 9th century, and here we've now gone into bronze or iron cheek pieces. So, but they have 3 holes, 1 for the bit and 2 for parts of the harness, and it's quite important that the bit is usually tied on. They like somehow to fix things with bits of leather. But the fact that the hole is so far down the cheek piece suggests that it's also functioning pretty well as a lever. Here is the later Arjun excavation where you have a bronze cheek piece sitting in a horse's head. The Chinese do something very inventive. I'm not sure it's technically so good, but it saves a lot of effort. They push the cheek piece through the bit. So you get, this is definitely the 3rd change. So what has happened is not that they are now copying the steppe, they've had a big upheaval, they've seen what their neighbors are doing like that, and they do something a bit different. They push the cheek piece through the bit. And this is the 8th century, this is the 7th century, and this is the 6th century. And I showed you an example in the British Museum, and it's got 2 rather sort of small attachments on the back like this, and I think they're a bit fragile. And here is someone actually using a horn version in the bit. And this, though this drawing is not relevant to the period, it shows you how it's fitted together. Here is the cheek harness, which is good. The head is actually down a bit, so it's coming up like that, and it's attached to 2 points on the cheek piece here and here, and the cheek piece is going through the bit, and it's attached to the rein. So it's a very efficient, mechanically efficient, but is it efficient for guiding a horse? I'm not so convinced. But what's quite clear is in the 8th to the 6th century, that is the 3rd session, we're different from the 1st, very different from the 1st, we're different from the 2nd, this is the 3rd, and now we change again. And this, oh well, I was going to show you Arjun. Those of you who don't know Arjun, it's here. And it's in Siberia on the Siam Mountains. And here, the person I've been showing you with this set of tripods is here. So this is a good 2,000 kilometers. Arjun has these fantastic belts, weapons, neck ornaments, hat ornaments, beads everywhere, and the man has over 2,000 cast gold panthers. This lady has hammered ones. And this is the man in the 8th century in China, and he has a gold belt. Now, he cannot have been ignorant of the value of having a gold belt. What it means is the news has reached him. He has a foreign spouse, a spouse from the Ark, and the news has reached him that it's cool to wear a gold belt. I mean, the belt is probably these bits, plus these 2 triangles, and in fact, other people in the agricultural area adopt bronze versions, but nobody has this much gold. And he also has iron blades in his bronze knives. So that's a foreign item as well. So you just cannot think that this man independently invented the idea of a gold belt. He has undoubtedly heard of gold belts, and he's got hold of a lot of gold. It is not easy to find gold in the lowest plateau, and he's at the southern end of the lowest plateau. It's not easy at all. That's a dense sand pit. It's not a place for mining gold. So he's got it by exchange with people from the steppe. So this is a very important moment when, in some ways, the balance doesn't look that good. The northerners are pressing south. The elite Zhou are having to adapt, and yet it turns out all right. If we go to the fourth stage, in fact, we now find another change, but instead of things going to a military crisis, this is a period when China is divided into many different so-called states. But instead of there being a military crisis from the north, these Rong, these outsiders, are settling here and here and here and here. They're all over the place, and they have just moved into gaps because these states don't have big boundaries. There's plenty of space of scrubland, rough territory in between. So this is something that's grossly underestimated by historians using texts, that the presence of outsiders is seen with some hindsight after we're looking at texts that were edited and re-edited in the Han Dynasty. The Zhuojuan and then the later Zhang Guoci all give very negative views of these Rong, of these outsiders, but they're turning out quite useful. And I think the truth of the matter is that we should not be so sort of inside-outside opinionated, that in this long period of the Zhou rule, the Zhou, who are criticized for failing to keep the whole thing together, are still maintaining their ritual system, and everybody, including these southerners, are copying them. And meanwhile, the Rung and the other people who are called the Di, who are up here, the Yi, who are here, are living happily among the Zhou, and quite a lot of them are adopting Chinese names and Chinese ritual systems. But the Zhou type states then imitate many features of the steppe life. So this is obviously a high-ranking member of the Qi state. The Qi state is in Shandong here. There. Now, what are they doing with 600 horses? This is not a high-stated statement in the Zhou system. You need 600 chariots, but not 600 horses. He's got 600 horses. They haven't excavated them all, but they've excavated this many, and they're all the way around this tomb. The tomb is badly robbed, but typical of many tombs of this period, which is certainly from the 6th century onwards, is surrounded by stone. And this is certainly a steppe feature, and it's got its goods, its burial goods, in a separate box. And that is too a steppe feature. So I don't think this man is from the steppe in any way. I think what I'm saying is that the interactive society of the outsiders living in among the Zhou elite leads to borrowing, and the Rong and Di borrow the Zhou elite system. There's no doubt about it, and I think one should give the Zhou enormous credit for inventing a system that got so widely adopted. And in things I'm writing now, I definitely would stress the effectiveness of the Zhou system, despite the, if you like, bureaucratic failure. And what happens? We get to the fourth setup. We get cheek pieces again. They've dropped the bronze ones and they've gone back to organic ones. So this is not a normal movement. This is because they're having managers among the states for the horses who are using their local material, which is either antler or bone. And here we have on this slide, this is the earliest group which the Chinese themselves identify as Rung. Here they put their bone or antler in the Chinese system through, or the Zhou system I should call it, through the bit. Here there's no doubt we're looking at tombs that are Rung tombs. This one is a hybrid, but this is a Rung tomb. I'm going to show you its content in a minute. And you can see its geometric patterns are these people in Feng Shui Ling. This is the Zheng Houyi, the big Zheng Houyi tomb near the Chu. They have borrowed the type of cheek piece that you would find in the Ark. And here this is Ningxia, and this is a place called Zaitouhe. And only recently have the archaeologists moved into excavating these Rung tombs, but they show all sorts of other features that are not local Zhou. So that the Zhou elite are picking up a new, completely new style of decoration of their cheek piece. And the decoration type is a northern type. And that, the one with the decoration, this one here, comes from this tomb. So this is definitely not a local Zhou tomb. It's covered on the surface like a kurgan with stone. Inside, I haven't got space, time to explain, but the steppe area, the main lord is buried with his retainers. This is explained in Herodotus, and it's picked up by these outsiders within the Zhou system. And here you have an example with a central burial and his retainers either side. They're often women, but not always, sometimes guards, as in the steppe. Then you have animal heads, and I promise you, animal heads are not the done thing if you're looking at a proper Zhou type burial. And it's certainly not proper to have gold personal ornaments. These are for the ears. Then they acquire bronzes by relationships, by looting, by gifting, and I think there's a large amount of work to be done on gifting. And this is a Zhou bronze which they've acquired. And this tomb has lots of them. But this one is made by the local people, and is imitating a steppe cauldron, and is a very wobbly piece of work. So that the people who are making these tombs and using the gold are not great casters of bronze vessels, though they can perfectly well make ornaments for horses and their own clothes. So that's stage 4. And stage 4 is really, in technical terms, simply a modification of stage 3, but it's the very fact that they've moved back to an organic material that suggests that they must have got the idea from the incomers, people from the Ark at the very least. So the purpose of showing you these 5 steps is really to say that we can't explain the presence of the horses without looking at their harness. And if we look at their harness, we see these very distinctive changes. And the last stage is more radical indeed, because now the steppe culture, the lordly culture of Arjun, which is my benchmark for what is the top place to be, and it's from the 9th to the 6th century. These are 7th century daggers excavated from Arjun II by Professor Chubanov, and it's a very important excavation that many of you should know, will know, and it's older than the other display of weapons with their gold embellishments. But across the whole of the steppe now, we're going from east to west with weapons with gold embellishment. And this is a Han Dynasty weapon in the steppe style, and here is the famous site, one of my most favorite sites of all, at Marjayuan. And at Marjayuan, you get a different kind of cheek piece. This is S-shaped. So we've jumped to a completely different kind of cheek piece. Why? I'm not convinced that I have any answer, but, well, let me just show you. We're going to look at Pazyryk and beryl in particular, and most especially beryl. Now we're in east here, we're in beryl, we're at eastern Kazakhstan. Pazyryk is on the edge of Mongolia and South Siberia. Arjun, of course, is in South Siberia. So, but this is a single related group, if you like, across these mountains. It's going to come on down these mountains and then across the western steppe all the way to the Black Sea. So this is beryl, and this is a very famous site, and I put it up and emphasize, please, please go to Cambridge. This is the only chance you will see in your lifetime in Britain eastern Kazakhstan material nearby. It's very hard to go to eastern Kazakhstan. I don't think most people here will ever make it. I didn't make it. Chris and I have seen it in the museum in Almaty, but this is a remarkable tomb with a single large burial and a whole set of horses crouching there. This is a picture, and these pictures of burial I've taken from this catalogue, which I thoroughly recommend. And here is a reconstruction of the horse. And this is where we see the S-shaped cheek piece, probably of wood. And here an actual excavated example illustrated in another quite different catalogue. And the horse is very highly decorated, all sorts of fittings on his back, on the saddle and around this strap going around his tail. Now, this is what the saddle looks like in the drawing in the catalogue, and it's a soft material. It has potentially metal or wood embellished with gold leaf in the front. This is for going around the tail. But I ask you to remember, please, these little triangular attachments and these hanging threads, because we're going to see them again now. The S-shape cheek piece is here in Pazyryk. This is one of their very, very elaborate bridles. And here is Pazyryk up here. There's Arjun, here's Pazyryk. Beryl is down here. And this is from a recent article by Yen Liu, who was a student here and has been extremely hard working on all this gold, which is a whole area of study. And you can see that it makes a great loop really outside Mongolia, but well into northwestern China. And the place it's famous for those of us who work on China, is Majiayuan. And this is a quite extraordinary cemetery. This is simply one tomb. And the cemetery is at Gansu, Zhangjiachuan, and it's up on the hill. That in itself is baffling. There are 60 tombs. They are arranged in a semicircle around a major tomb, as if we're looking at some form of steppe burial. And this is a catacomb. You wouldn't see a catacomb in main part of China, or only if it's occupied by a local regional group. And he has a lot of decoration. He has these pectorals. He has 2 or 3 large belts. There's a large belt hook, and we'll see in a minute his arm ornament. And most important is that he has this group of chariots in the main part of the chamber. And they are very, very densely made with very large numbers of joints, and very like the chariot that's found in Pazyryk. This is a hugely important site, much written about. And here is a much closer look at this man and his belt. This lower belt has this plaque arrangement, and the gold again is a sign of contact west or northwest. But we've left the north. All the first 4 changes were affecting China through the north. We're now looking at the northwest, or even the west, in Gansu province. And this, of course, is the area dominated by Qin. But this is not a Qin vassal, or not in no way related to the Qin, but he's part of the setup that the Qin is going to have to cope with. And here we have raptors and the use of gold. It almost looks Anglo-Saxon in the style. And here's his arm decoration, and this is one of his reconstructed chariots. And the chariots are immensely important. And Raphael Wang, who's also here, has written a very useful article showing how they're connected both to Pazyryk and to Iran. And these group of people are therefore not sitting isolated facing the Qin. They are the eastern end of a huge interlinked group of people who go all the way through Kazakhstan. These people share many details with the nomads or the pastoralists of Kazakhstan. And that is, in geopolitical terms, immensely important. The shift has been from a dominance of the Mongolian people, with a group now who are focused in Kazakhstan, and in both cases, the Chinese are having to reach accommodation, and I would stress that they proved exceptionally successful in reaching accommodation. First, with the Zhou and the various interstate groups, and secondly, here with the Qin and this group. So though the Qin are said to have lashed down, controlled the Western Rung, the Xi Rung. All I'd say is, well, I think they're working pretty well together. Both sides are occupying territory. Both sides are making a very good living. This man is incredibly wealthy. This is not an impoverished tomb in any way. And I think up to and including the Qin, the people in the agricultural basins have reached an accommodation with the horse owners. And here you see the comparison. This is Kazakhstan, this is Pazyryk, and this is Marjayan. So this is clearly one tradition that goes all the way to Kazakhstan. Now I have a question which I can't answer. These are actually the real horse bits and cheek pieces used in eastern Kazakhstan. So why do they also have these for burial? And I really don't know the answer to that, but I think there's something more to learn about the ceremonial burial of horses in Kazakhstan, Pazyryk, and also with the chariots at Marjayan. I think there's a very complicated difference between everyday riding and fighting. By now we're dealing entirely with riding, really, and the burial system. Now this is the final and clinching thing. Here we see the two saddles. This is Beryl, and this is Pazyryk. And Beryl, I mentioned, we must look at these little attachment, the triangular attachments, and the hanging threads, and the large loop that goes behind the tail of the horse. This horse also has S-shaped cheek pieces. So this horse undoubtedly comes out of the Kazakhstan type of horse management. You can't imitate the saddle and the cheek pieces without being connected to the Kazakhstan system. And the saddle is textile. It has these semi-triangular appendages like this one, and it has the hanging threads. And it doesn't show a decoration, but I expect it was. So we're looking at the cavalry of the first emperor being managed Western steppe-style horses. And when we look at the riders, we see this. This is a cavalryman, and we know because of his shoes. He's wearing the soft shoes with the seams, and he's wearing baggy trousers. And this man, a famous, much later, but Parthian warrior in bronze, is wearing baggy trousers. So we're looking at equivalent, similar lifestyles where riding horses was essential. And the people who made the terracotta warriors were absolutely clear what they were doing. They are not inventing anything. They're using the sort of horses that the Qin dynasty would have had, and they're presenting you with the kind of cavalry riders the Qin dynasty would have had. So what we're looking at is a record of why, or one of the reasons why, the Qin are successful. They're successful because they're not wasting effort fighting the Rung. They're using them to provide their cavalry. And the cavalry is managed probably by people from the Gansu borderland. They're not managed from Kazakhstan. But this is a single interactive unified steppe world meeting a single unified agricultural world. And this is the major geopolitical confrontation that is started in the Shang and goes right on into the Manchu dynasty. This is something that we are not sensitive enough to, that in fact the rulers of the Central Plains adopt different strategies, and many of the strategies work. What I don't think any of us understand is why, given that the Qin have got very good relationships with the Rung and related people in the West, why, when they push north into the Ordos region and build the wall, why that is the moment that precipitates the Xiongnu invasion. So we are looking at a tipping point. This is a moment when the relationship between the Central Plains, the central agricultural areas, and the North changed. And they didn't change for the better, though I'm sure if people do much more work, they will find what I have found, that there's much more accommodation, much more interaction that is positive. Here, just showing that the Sshape goes on into the Han Dynasty. Here is the British Museum version. The British Museum doesn't have stage 4 with the horns, but this one is not suitable for use. This is simply for burial. It's not strong enough. So this is the first emperor's horse for one of the chariots. It's a pretty brutal setup, and I'm not totally convinced it was used in life. But here is the rein attached to the bit. Here is the cheek piece, and as we saw at Persepolis, the kind of cheek piece is amazingly similar. So to summarize what I've said, if we didn't have the extreme landfall and climate gradation, I don't think what I've described would be happening. It's immensely important, this difference of height, rainfall and temperature. And that's a force, definitely a force, and it's pushing downwards. And it's extremely hard to push upwards. And the Central Plain people don't generally. The only place they occupy on large-scale agriculture is in the northeast. And the horse brings a different kind of force, and if we don't count it in, we must sort of almost put it into the calculation. If we don't put the horse into the calculation, we don't understand why this is so important. The second is that, and this will come out in this publication very soon in December, we've explained much more clearly why breeding horses in the Central Plains is very difficult. And then, so 5 phases in 1,000 years does suggest that they had to get horses at least from the northern arc. May not have been from the real steppe, but after all, what we call Inner Mongolia today is part of the arc. It's not difficult to slide in and out, and that's where I think the horses have come from. Lots more work is needed. Now, these authors under number 4 have all, in my view, usefully described problems with horses. And the Tang, the Song, and the Ming all have problems with horses, and all their diplomacy, their geopolitics, all built around the need to get horses. So what we actually call the technological exchange, which I've just shown, or the Silk Road later, is actually about exchanging things for horses and making sure that the people on the agricultural basins had enough horses to hold people back. They didn't always succeed, and the Khitan, also the Xiongnu, the Khitan, the Mongols and the Manchus all got through, but in order to manage the situation, they took their capitals to the north. That's why the capital was at Beijing, and that is essential, and that's the short route to the steppe. So I think, I'm not saying that horses were the be-all and end-all, but I think in the geopolitical situation and thinking about who managed the situation well, I think we have to factor in the horses. And I, for one, have become immensely impressed by both the Zhou and the Qin in managing what was essentially a difficult relationship and creating allies and clients out of people who could be enemies. So it's really in later times when we have a different kind of written record that the situation looks different. I'm not sure if we actually saw it on the ground in archaeology, as I've just shown you, it would be that different. But so the propaganda says people who don't write, who don't cultivate grain, who don't venerate their ancestors are in some way inferior. But that's been said in the West too. I think what we see are 2 very different societies who are equally matched and whose strength is balanced against each other. Sometimes one is stronger, sometimes the other. Thank you.